Greetings, metalheads, and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George, and today I'm back with another underrated album review for you. Another album that I personally feel doesn't get the love and appreciation that it deserves. So, today's underrated album comes from a truly legendary band, one of the true vanguard of old school death metal, old school US death metal. We're talking Incantation here. A criminally underrated band in general, but the really underrated album, in my opinion, from their catalogue, although there is a couple, would be the second album, Mortal Throne of Nazarene, released in 1994. Now, I didn't really realise until fairly recently just how underrated this album is, and that was only from actually reading the insert and the little kind of information, the little review in the booklet of Upon the Throne of Apocalypse, which was released, and it all gets a bit confusing, but it was released a year later and is essentially the rough mix version of Mortal Throne of Nazarene, but with the track listing in reverse order. And this particular version came out in, 2019? So I think this was released originally in 1995. This is now a remastered version of this mix, released in 2019. So, to be honest, it's a little bit confusing, and some of the sources that you read dispute this and dispute that. So I gave up, because I'm not going to waste my time on that. But what I will say is, this album, I didn't quite realise and appreciate that Mortal Throne of Nazarene effectively caused the band to implode due to being unhappy and dissatisfied with the mix, with the sound of the album. There was creative or musical differences going on within the band, and consequently it caused a seismic change. So when we get the third album, or the fourth album technically, Diabolical Conquest, we've got a almost entirely different lineup, except for John McIntee, the main man, if you like, guitarist and vocalist as well. So Mortal Throne of Nazarene, to me, has never quite been an absolute favourite Incantation album. I think the favourite Incantation album would be a very difficult album to choose to settle on. It's not quite as good, in my opinion, as Onwards to Golgotha, that debut album, which is regarded as being an absolute all-time death metal classic, with good reason. But I've always thought that this is quite a good, solid album. I will admit, if we are going to compare Mortal Throne of Nazarene to, I always get it the wrong way around, Upon the Throne of Apocalypse, this is the better sounding recording. Definitely, and because this has now been remastered and it sounds very big. The drums sound very full. The riffs sound really thick, and we've got such a low reverb bass. Vocals sound absolutely haunting and bestial. But I've always quite enjoyed this album, I must say. I think Mortal Throne of Nazarene is a good, solid, old school death doom album. It kicks off with Demonic Incarnate, and if you just check out that track alone, you could kind of see where maybe some of the issues were in terms of production. It sounds very calamitous. It sounds like there's a lot of clatter going on there, and I think with the vocals as well, things do get a little bit murky at times, and that kind of calamitous clattering sound that we get with the mix here almost sounds a little bit more grind or death grind than death doom. That said, I think that this is very much of its time in that sound, but Diabolic Incarnate is a pretty solid death metal song. It's a good way to open up the album. You know, there's some great guitars throughout, and I think the riffs are the real mainstay there. They're the real drive and the real attraction. So it's a good way to open up the album. Then we get emaciated Holy Figure, which is a good track. Again, very grinding. We kind of get a lot of blasts. It's almost a bit Autopsy at times. But then, due to the last sort of section of the song being very slowed, almost just like an outro, the album almost quickly loses pace. That said, things pick up for Iconoclasm of Catholicism, which is a ripper. Again, solid death metal. You know, what's not to enjoy? Again, it does remind me a bit of earlier, I'm going to say maybe Acts of the Unspeakable era Autopsy as well. Good track though. Essence Ablaze, again, much of the same, but we're getting some real solid slabs of riff in there. We're getting a lot of blasting drums thrown in there. The vocals, not amazing, but good enough. Because, as I say, the real drive there, the real focus is those riffs, and they are thoroughly enjoyable. Nocturnal Dominion, solid track, really enjoy that. That's one of the stronger tracks on this album. And it's interesting because from that track out, we start to get more of the doom vibes coming through. Although that's a solid death doom number, it's heavy hitting. I would say it's, you know, a more prominent standout track there. But if we're talking real, genuine standouts, the Ibex Moon, track number 6 there, is a clear contender for best track on the album, being that it's an absolute monster of death doom. We get some real weighty riffs. We get some real slabs of riffing coming in there. Absolutely fantastic. Just showing off this rather interesting insert actually while I remember. Yes, interesting images of hell going on there. So yes, that is it's a solid track. You know, it's 4+ minutes, but it feels like a pretty solid bludgeoning of a track. Then we get a very short grinding or death grind track, Blissful Blood Shower, which is pretty bludgeoning, I must say. Before we close out the album with, in my opinion, the clear album highlight, Abolishment of Immaculate Serenity. 8 minutes plus, solid death doom. Freaking brilliant. Absolutely love it. What's not to enjoy? Solid slabs of death doom. Love it. Killer riffs. You know, that mix doesn't help the vocals. That sound doesn't really help the vocals very much, but I'd say it's a solid track. There's not much about this album that I don't enjoy. I think it's a very solid Incantation album. Interestingly though, when you flip that track listing and you do it in reverse order, and with the sound that we have on Upon the Throne of Apocalypse, it sounds like a different album. Although you recognise and you know the songs, it sounds like a vastly different album, and it does sound better overall. But I love the raw, primitive sound. I think that's the thing. I do love the raw, primitive sound of this original recording, Mortal Throne of Nazarene. I think it has a certain attraction. Also, the album cover is absolutely harrowing. That is a vision of hell. Freaking crazy stuff going on. So, lineup-wise, we had Jim Rowe on drums. We had guitars and vocals was Craig Pillard. Then we had Dan Camp on bass. And then, of course, we had the legendary John McIntee on guitars. Legendary lineup, I suppose, those early years. You know, that kind of first maybe 3 or 4 albums is a pretty solid run, in my opinion. But I don't really think there's a bad Incantation album. There's a couple of albums in the kind of latter period that I've read not very nice reviews about, but don't really get that either. I think that there's not a bad Incantation album. I'd say they are pretty freaking solid across the board. And actually, as I say, I was really surprised, revisiting this album quite a lot, really surprised at the impact that this recording had on the band, causing that total implosion. And some of those other reviews that I've read where people have said, don't bother with this at all. Just listen to this. I think for a fan, this is definitely something that you need to check out. Definitely. And if you're an Incantation fan, then it is essential listening. And I think this is underrated. Absolutely underrated. It is solid death metal. If you've never heard of Incantation, you definitely need to check them out. I wouldn't say that this is the first album to check out if you're new to the band. I'd say you definitely want to be checking out Onwards to Golgotha. You also want to be checking out some of the latter albums as well, in my opinion. Dirges of Elysium, Vile Sects is a great album, Profane Nexus. Also albums like Diabolical Conquest, really solid albums. So do your research and delve into Incantation if you love solid death metal. If you love bands like Vital Remains, Autopsy, Deicide, maybe Deicide in terms of their not so fast moments, don't know. But if you love good old school death metal, then you're definitely going to dig Incantation. And Mortal Throne of Nazarene is an album that any Incantation fan must check out. So there you have it. An underrated album from US death metal legends Incantation, Mortal Throne of Nazarene. What are your thoughts and opinions on this album from this legendary band? Very interested to hear thoughts and opinions of others as always. Thank you very much for watching. Please do feel free to like, subscribe, share, support. It's all very much appreciated. Do check back soon for more reviews and recommendations of all the good heavy things. And until next time, take care of yourselves and stay heavy.